class in England, the class distinctions, because we're a very class-based society, but you're saying they're not fundamental. They're not fundamental distinctions as such. They're there, but it's just a matter of, maybe, I don't know, is it because they're just richer than some people are just rich, and then there's people not quite.
Well, I may have talked about it before, but luckily we can cut out redundancies. I mean, the difference between the, again, Weber, on caste, class, and status group, Weber's work is seminal. Basically, you have three forms of stratification in his model. You have ones which are birth given, that is caste. You are born a Brahmin, or you're born an untouchable, or whatever it is. You can't move between that. It's a ritual status and it's a blood-based status. And when Tocqueville said that France is a caste society, still in the early 19th century, he meant you were born a peasant and you were born a nobleman. And the legal system is different for different people in France, as it was even then. You know, when you went to law, you were tried by a different legal system. It's as if our present British legal system, whereby the House of Lords have to be tried to a certain extent by other lords, but otherwise, you know, the Queen, if she commits offence, comes into our common law courts. If Prince Charles speeds, then, you know, he gets fined and he'll have to go to court, etc. So France was a semi-caste system, as Tocqueville thought of it, and much of Europe was like that. You were born in Italy, Spain, France, into a caste where your parents, it had grown into a caste system. It hadn't always been like that, but it had become more caste-like. And the French Revolution was an attempt to overthrow it, but Tocqueville said it hadn't succeeded. The second form of system is a class system. And this is, you can have it in variations between very strong and very weak. You can argue that the English have the strongest class system in history, and that class is more important in England and has been for centuries than anywhere else in the world. It's a subject which is behind much of English behavior. I mean, it's not alluded to directly, but much of our conspicuous consumption, what you buy and where you go on holiday and your car and who you marry and so on, is around the themes of class. Our educational system, when I told my Chinese friends that the reason they were sending their children to Eton was not to get a good education, it was to get a good class, they were astounded, but here we are. So basically, our system is geared around a very, and here again, it's the strongest class system because it's much more nuanced and differentiated. Most class systems, you can say, you know, you're middle class or you're working class or you're upper class. Ours have this system like a huge cabinet, as my grandmother used to think of it, as a whole lot of drawers. And you know, you had the top drawer, but there were lots of drawers. And the difference between the drawers was more important, within a set of drawers was more important. The difference between the middle class and the lower class was less important than the difference between the upper middle class and the middle class and the lower middle class. And so this differentiation, often termed in the color of your collar, etc., blue collar and white collar and so on, that was terribly important in England. And the fight, and Jane Austen and English novels are a lot about this, the fight to move, inch your way up. And the reason why this fight was so important was that it had a feature which made it different from very strong class systems, which is that it was very permeable. Because of the peculiar system of inheritance, whereby you had full entitlement to dispose of your wealth to anyone. And at birth, you couldn't be assured of where you would be later on in your life. As I may have quoted, nemo est heres viventis, no one is the heir of a living person. And so the son of a rich person never knew where they were. I mean, if they kept on the right side of their parents and so on. But basically, they could hope for a good education. But after that, you know, their father might be Rupert Murdoch, but who knows what might happen to them. And so basically, it led to a great deal of insecurity. And a lot of my work is about the insecurity this caused, because usually you have joint property, joint inheritance. You know where you are. You may be a peasant or you may be a lord, but you will always be a lord or a peasant. So the English system at birth sets you free to face all these ladders, which you maybe start, say, in the middle class, but the fear of falling, and I was looking at one of the interviews, a brilliant interview with Brian Harrison recently, a very good historian, and he describes again and again how his family were not really trying to climb, they were frightened of falling. Because if you, and I saw this was my family, my parents, you know, retired, and although they had a good job in India, their pension was small, and my grandparents the same. The humiliations of finding that people were not treating you in the way, or that you couldn't buy the holidays and the houses and so on, and gradually you would slip away. So this constant preoccupation, keeping up with the Joneses, as we used to call it, is a central feature of English literature and life and philosophy and so on. And Daniel Defoe and everyone has a great deal about it. And it meant that you could have a great deal of mobility. So it was a very strong structure of ladders, infinite ladders in all the different occupations. But within them, and I found this with, you know, studying the history of English villages and so on, that often in 2 generations, this was a feature of the English. If you're going to have a ladder system, you've got to have mechanisms for moving people up and down the ladders. And the English had a very simple system: make some money and then turn it into class. So the first generation, there were many descriptions of this, first generation would strike lucky. They would go to the empire, or they go to America, or they'd invent something, or they'd make a lot of money in the mill. And I saw this in my public school. Sedbergh was filled with the children of rich northern industrialists who'd made their money. And then they sent them to a decent northern public school to become middle class.
Like the footballers sending their children to the...
Yeah, exactly. So you had your northern accent and rough manners and so on, but your children, by gum, they were going to be sorry about this. Anyway, so basically, and in the extreme cases, as George Bernard Shaw parodied it, all you needed to take the lady in the flower market to turn her into upper middle class was change her voice. That was certainly a very large Pygmalion. And
of course, there's the pushback was the kind of clerks put down of Heseltine. You know, he's the sort of person that has to buy his own furniture, that kind of thing. You know, the fights amongst the